Well, today I'm working on a Victrola VI. That is the second size up tabletop model without a lid. 2-spring motor, and this particular one has a serial number on the case putting it in 1920. However, you can see clearly something is not quite right with this machine. And I don't mean it's missing its motor. I have it out for repair. The serial number on this one is, there you go, 532 938. That puts it squarely in 1920 for Victor production. But if you look at this is the this is the motorboard. Doesn't match. Now, I'm guessing here that the motorboard was made from wood that came from an old radio cabinet. Kind of looks it. Something from the 1950s or 40s, be my guess. They had to router out the cabinet, the piece of wood, in order to fit the motor in there. Did quite a good job, too, because it lines up perfectly with its crank hole, which is also changed. As you can see there, they actually had to re-drill the crank hole for the new motor's crank, because they did not use an original motor in this. The horn and everything is, as usual. The rest of the case is typical of the Victor VI. It is oak. And you can see, let's put that back. We have a speed control that more properly belongs on a mid-teens Victor VIII or something like that. It has a typical brake. This style of brake was used after the bullet brakes of the early models, so that's normal enough. You can see where they had to modify the crank hole there with a brass plate in order to cover the old hole and relocate it. My guess is that somebody, probably a Victor repairman, because this took some skill and some knowledge of these machines to know what you're doing, probably had a lot of extra parts and decided one day, you know what, I want a machine, so I'm going to build one. And they did. Why they did not refinish the extra piece, the new motorboard, to match the rest, I don't know. Maybe they liked it that way. Maybe they liked the contrast. Who knows? But most of it is actually covered by the turntable when it's on. And a turntable, of course, is the little 10-inch one. That would be common on, say, a machine from 1911, 12, or 13, around in there, 14. That's all right, it works. And here is the motor they used. This motor also would be more properly found on a machine from the early teens. It's a small. This is the smaller of the two spring sizes used. It was used for the 6, and this probably did come out of a 6. Or an 8. This could be from an early Victrola VIII. And it is all cleaned up and repacked now. I took it all apart, scrubbed everything, because the springs were thumping and bumping. As usual, my guess is this has not seen maintenance in at least half a century, maybe a little bit more. I'm putting the build on this one likely mid-century, about 1950, somewhere around in there. You can see that not everything looks correct here. This little gear here on the turntable shaft is upside down. They did this because they had to fit a later style governor and a later style shaft to work with this machine and that turntable. And it works very well, too. There's no problems with it. Take a look at my little oily because I just finished. Everything's nice. And the springs are pretty good. The springs are original Victors and they're in good shape. Let's see if it'll still has enough juice to spin up because I was playing with it earlier. There we go. As you can see, it meshes nicely. Nothing's grinding or off kilter or anything. It's working very well. So whoever modified this motor, they knew what they were doing. They knew what parts to use. They had them on hand. So my guess would be, let that spin too fast, somebody, probably a retired Victor repairman, except by 1950s they would have been retired. The Victor company went out of business in 1929 when RCA took them over. They used the standard Victor VI rear elbow, and the tone arm there is missing most of its nickel plating, but it's still intact in one piece. And they went with the Victrola No. 2 reproducer. It has a female-style crank. This is actually the earliest Victor VI cranks, Victrola, the 6 cranks, would have had a flat. The shank here would have been flat and a little kind of weld on the end. They were weak. The second style was the female-style crank, which was this one. It's a round shank all around, and you can see it threads onto the motor, while the last version of the crank threads into the motor. These are actually somewhat hard to find for these older machines, but it works. It's perfectly sized for this. I'm guessing that was originally on an early Probably like a 1914, 1913 Victor 6. The Victor 6 was manufactured 1911 to 1925. So there were quite a few around. It was a very popular machine. But I guess somebody did not want all of these leftover parts to go to waste, so they decided, you know what? Let's use them. Let's build them. Let's put them together, which is a good thing. I had intended to use this machine for parts. I spotted it on a well-known auction site, and it was very cheaply priced. And I figured, well, for the reproducer alone, I could use that and the crank and a few other little things I bought. But somebody put so much work into this to do it right that I just can't see throwing it away. This would make a nice machine to play records on for somebody, you know, who doesn't necessarily want to, say, maybe take it outside to play them or whatever, if he has a really nice machine. Or just wants to play records, no matter, because the case is in very nice shape. There's a board, I'm not going to show it, but yeah, maybe I can. The board on the bottom is off yet another machine. The original must have fallen out, but that patent sticker on there, you really can't see it, I know. It says 1918. So that's off yet another machine, pointing once again to somebody who worked for Victor at one time or repaired Victors who would have had access to a lot of spare parts. You really would have needed a lot just to do that motor the way he did. It would have needed quite a few. And you can see everything was lined up nice. He did a really good job. Nothing's dragging or misaligned. Victor Victrola VI, you know, case 1920, motor 1912, you know, and crank 1912, turntable probably 1912 also, because the earlier 6s did use the 10-inch turntable, while later ones went to the 12-inch. And of course, that reproducer was common after pretty much everything after 1918, you know, Victor 1919. That until the introduction of the orthophonics and the number 4 in the mid-20s. A very good choice, a reproducer for this machine. Well, there you go. I just figured I'd do a video of this, just showing all the little parts used, because there will be another video eventually showing this machine actually playing. I want to replace that felt on there because that looks nasty. And it's a little rusted and tatty. It's coming apart, so we'll take care of that. I don't want all that junk on my records. Well, there you go. Victor Victrola VI, 1920, 1950, 1913, and every day between.